Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at our first lesson in our study of the USA, and it's all about the American economy around the year 1929. So today we're going to talk about the Wall Street crash in 1929. We'll be looking at how and why the Wall Street crash happened. For those of you who maybe turn into the news a little bit, maybe you've watched some maybe American-based films, you might have heard about Wall Street before, and that's the sort of center in New York City of the U.S. economy. It's where the stock market is mainly based. We'll talk a little bit more about what stock markets actually are. Your starter today is to have a look at 3 questions. The first one is, how do banks work? The second is, what are shares in a company? And that has to do with stocks. And lastly, what is buying on credit? Now, I completely appreciate you might not know what some or all of these even are. In any case, we will write down our starter in a different color. We'll write down those 3 questions, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability. We'll leave them blank if we need to, and in a few moments' time, we'll be able to have a look at the video and take up what those are. So what we'll do now is we'll pause the slide. Please write down your title, learning objective, and your starter. When you're ready, you can resume playing, and we'll be taking those up together. So taking a look at our starter question, how do banks work? Now, if you have a bank account, ultimately, the bank takes your money and they use your money for investments in businesses or personal loans and generate more income by charging interest on those. So that might be a word that you're familiar with. If I lent you £10 because you needed it today, I might expect you to pay me back £12 in a week. And that £2 extra, that's my fee for offering you that cash today. So banks keep our money safe in exchange for a fee. They also will lend that money out to generate interest to make more profit for themselves. The second question, shares in a company. You can go to a stock market. You might have seen TV commercials for things like eToro or Trading 212, these apps where you can buy and sell shares in a company. You can go today and you can buy a small little slice of Tesla, for example. And right now, today, if you went to go and buy a share of Tesla, it's roughly $245 US, about 220 pounds. Now, tomorrow, that share might be worth more money. It might be worth 250 pounds, or it might be worth 150 pounds. And there's an element of risk in buying shares of a company, but we'll see them as little pieces that you can buy and sell. And the objective of buying shares is to buy it when it's really low, the price is cheap, and then to sell it when the price is high. And the last one, buying on credit. This is when you don't actually have the money now, but you could pay it back in installments over time. So big purchases, thinking like a brand new car, a house, these sorts of things you might want to buy on credit. So you will go to a bank and you'll say, I make X amount of money in a given year. I want to buy a house that's worth £200,000. What kind of deal can you give me on giving me the credit to buy that home? We call that a mortgage. You might also do it for buying a car, which would be a car loan. Go ahead and we'll just pause the video one more time. Please make sure you have the answers in red text written beneath each of the questions in your starter. When you're finished with that, you can go ahead and hit resume to continue the video. Great, so now that we've had a look at our starter, it's time to begin with some of our glossary terms. Now, each history class will have a glossary booklet. Think of it as like a glossary in the back of your textbook. Please open your glossary book to Unit 1, and you should find some of the following key terms we see on the board. Now, how do we go ahead and figure out what these are? That's up to you. If you know a few of them, you can go ahead and answer those ones first. You can do this by process of elimination, or the recommended way would be to use one of our US textbooks if you're in a classroom, or you can log in and get the textbook online from home to be able to answer each of these key terms. So we won't be writing these in our booklet, in our exercise books. We'll be writing them in that A4 booklet called your glossary. So again, we'll pause the video now. Your job is to answer all of these key terms. We have a total of 7 of them, and you can use the red terms that are at the bottom to help you. When you're finished, after a few minutes, go ahead and continue playing the video just to double check we're all on the right track. So let's take a look at the following key terms. The first one has to do with the title of our lesson today. It's called the Wall Street Crash. And this was the collapse of the US stock market in 1929. We'll talk about the specific causes of it, but we just have to think of a very, very difficult financial time for most Americans. Stock market, this is a place where you can buy and sell shares of companies. A Republican, this is a more conservative party in the USA. Kind of think of it like the Conservative Party here in the UK. A Hooverville is a slum or a shanty town, and they were named after the US President Herbert C. Hoover. And that wasn't a compliment, that was actually a bit of an insult. Hobos, unemployed wanderers or unemployed workers. Congress, it's kind of like our parliament. The US has divided into the Senate and the House of Representatives. We have the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And lastly, Great Depression. Think of it as an economic and social slump. So again, we'll pause the video now. Please make sure we have those 7 key terms written down correctly. When you're finished, resume the video. So to understand what life was like in America in 1929, we just need to back up in history a little bit and look at what happened after World War I ended in 1918. So America came out victorious. They were one of the biggest superpowers in the world at the time, and America had a really strong war manufacturing industry. So America was producing loads and loads of weapons, tanks, airplanes. But when World War I ended, you don't really need weapons, tanks, and airplanes. You need things like cars. You need things like home goods, such as vacuum cleaners, hair dryers, ovens, refrigerators. And this is where America shifted their entire industry from war into civilian life. And we're going to talk about the automobile boom, because this took place in the 1920s. So in 1899, if you wanted to buy a car, this is what it looked like. So mainly made out of wood, the wheels were wooden, there was no suspension. They were incredibly slow. Top speed, you're looking at about between 6 and 8 miles an hour. And it would take a team of 8 men about 7 days and cost roughly $1,000. That's about 23,000 pounds today. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't be keen spending 23,000 pounds on a car that looked like this. By 1925, a very, very intelligent car manufacturer named Henry Ford, who owned Ford Motor Company, he came up with a new way to build cars. He said, we shouldn't have 8 men spend a whole week building one car. I should get loads of people building cars on an assembly line. And this is the vehicle that he came up with. It was called the Ford Model T, which looks a lot more similar to what you and I would recognize as a car. It had a much higher top speed. It had pneumatic tires, which had air in them, a lot less wood used. There was metal bodywork, and they were much, much more affordable. So this took 120 men 1 day to build. It cost about $300 at the time, which is roughly £5,500 today. Now, Henry Ford would change the way that you and I would actually buy our goods, because he believed in something called supply and demand. The more there is of something, the less people are desperate to buy it, meaning we can lower the prices. So what we'll do is we'll pause the slide now, just make a quick note about car manufacturing in 1899 versus 1925. Mainly we want the text above, 8 men, 7 days, and $1,000 versus 120 men, 1 day, and $300. When you're finished with that, please go ahead and resume the video. So picking back up with the automobile boom, we'll make a little note in our book. During the 1920s, America experienced a decade of great success. We call this period after World War I the boom years. We also call it the Roaring Twenties sometimes. America had just won the First World War. They were doing very well financially. We know the Ford Model T was a very affordable and very, very good selling vehicle. And Henry Ford understood this idea of supply and demand and how it could influence prices. And this led him to the assembly line. Now you'll be able to see at the bottom right-hand side here, we have an image of the Ford automobile plant in Detroit, Michigan. This is in the kind of north of the United States. And this was just a typical day in these factories. You had hundreds and hundreds of vehicles rolling off the assembly line. In the picture above, we actually see the assembly line itself. If you look quite closely where the cursor is, you can see almost like a rail that these cars are moving along. and they move from station to station to station. So all the way back here at station number 1, they're putting in the steering wheel. And it's one person's job all day long putting in steering wheels. They're really good at it. They can do it really, really quickly. And when it moves to station 2, then the windscreen is added. And station 3, the tires go on. And station 4, the engine's put in. And because all these individual people are so good at their one job, it speeds up that manufacturing process. This allowed Ford to make lots and lots of cars, which meant he could sell them for lower prices. So again, we're going to pause the video now. If we can make a note of the following 5 points in our books. When you're finished, resume playing. So now we're going to have a little talk about supply and demand. And this is a concept that the more there is of something, the less it's going to cost. So the more common a product is, the lower the price, because we're not too worried about buying it. And something that we can actually use to illustrate supply and demand would be during March of 2020 when coronavirus hit and we were all asked to stay at home. And inside the supermarkets, there were a lot less products, namely toilet paper. And because there was less toilet paper on the shelves, the prices went up a lot, and then people were actually selling toilet paper on eBay and online for far more than it's actually worth in the shops. Now, the more common a product is, the lower the price. So lots of toilet paper, low prices. But if that product becomes rare, the price will go up because competition for the product also increases. So we can think of this in many different ways, such as pens. There's loads of pens, meaning the prices are quite low. But if you wanted to buy the 1923 FA Cup football that was used in the final match, there's only one of those. And that means the price will be much higher. So the more common a product, lower the price. The more rare a product, the higher the price. If we can make a note of that in our books, and then we can go ahead and continue playing. So we're nearly ready to talk about the Great Depression. Our last little bit about assembly line and prices is on the screen for us now, which we'll make a note about. Henry Ford, we know he developed the assembly line and conveyor belt process to speed up motor production. His River Rouge plant in Detroit, Michigan, we saw pictures of that a little while ago. It became one of the largest factories in the entire world. And he produced a standard Model T Ford. That was the kind of the main vehicle that Ford was producing. And by the mid-1920s, almost everyone who owned a car, it was a Ford Model T, just simply because of the affordability. 26 million cars were registered in the USA by 1929, and most of those, again, were these Ford Model Ts. During the 1920s, about $1 billion a year was being spent on the construction of a new national highway network. Before the 1920s, a lot of roads in America were still dirt. They weren't always paved, and that poses a lot of problems for vehicles to be traveling on them. So again, the more cars you have, the more roads you'll need. And the automobile industry also caused other industries to grow quite quickly. When you build a car, you need steel, you need rubber, you need leather, you need paint. And these industries grew alongside the motor industry. So we'll go ahead, we'll pause the video now, we'll put those 6 points into our books, and we'll hit play when we're ready. So now we're ready to talk about the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression. Now, the Wall Street crash was caused by too many loans going out from banks. And as you remember back to our starter, banks work by you deposit your money, they take that money, they lend it out to people, they generate interest when those loans are repaid, they give you your money back, and the bank also makes a little bit of profit. What happened during the Wall Street crash was the banks were just lending out too much money. And when people went to go and get their life savings out, there was no money left in the bank. Too many people weren't paying back loans, which meant this money was just lost. 5,000 banks ended up shutting down as a result of the Wall Street crash. Now, this led to a time of economic hardship we call the Great Depression. People lost their life savings overnight. This led to banks repossessing houses, cars, furniture, meant the bank actually went to your home and took stuff away to try and cover their losses. Now, some people even lived in places called shantytowns, which were known as Hoovervilles. They were named after President Herbert C. Hoover. This was a bit of an insult to the president because many Americans felt he wasn't doing enough to resolve the problem. And if we look up to the top right, we can actually see an example of a Hooverville. This is a little house that someone's built out of old sheets of steel and cardboard because they've lost their home, they've lost their job, they've lost everything, and they're just trying to simply get by. So we'll go ahead, we'll pause the video now. The 4 points about the Great Depression, we'll put those in our books, and when we're ready, we can continue playing. So in just a moment, we're going to take a look at a short GCSE Pod video. This is a really good opportunity to have pens at the ready. The video will go through some important information about the Great Depression and the Wall Street crash. It's always a good idea where possible just to make a couple little notes about this. So I would advise making a mind map that says Great Depression. You can just put some little bubbles around it. And any ideas you hear, anything of interest during the video, you can go ahead and write that down as it plays. Wonderful. So our last job today is to grab a USA textbook. If you're in a classroom, they're in the cupboard. If you're at home, the link has been uploaded for you to use. Have a look through pages 6 to 9 and make notes about any 3 of the following. You can make notes as a list, you can do them as mind maps, but we're going to be looking at the following: unemployment, depression in the city, depression in the countryside, family life, Hoovervilles, or bonus marchers. And what you'll notice, each of those terms listed on the screen now were actually headings in your textbook. So your job is to read those pages, have a pick of any 3 out of these, make some notes about the following, and that will finish off our lesson for today.